He thought it would be a quick stop. That was the lie. The car had not exploded. There was no smoke, no dramatic warning. It just slowed down, fought him for a few more seconds, and then gave up in the middle of the day like it had made a decision. He was driving home when he felt it first. A shudder, a strange hesitation, then another. Then the kind of silence that only happens when a machine stops pretending it still wants to work. He coasted to the side of the road and sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He tried the ignition once, nothing. He tried it again, still nothing. He looked at the dash, hoping some light would explain what had happened. It didn't. The car was done, at least for now. That was how the whole thing started, not with panic, not with fire, just a dead engine in the wrong place at the wrong time. He could already feel the rest of the day slipping away. So he did what almost anyone would do. He called for a tow. The first person he spoke to sounded calm, professional, a little too practiced. They asked where he was, what kind of car it was, where it needed to go, how soon he needed help. He explained the situation. They gave him a price. It wasn't cheap, but it seemed reasonable enough under the circumstances. He repeated it back to make sure he had heard correctly. They said yes. That was the number. He wrote it down. That was the first mistake. Not because writing it down was bad, because later he would wish he had made them send it in writing. At the time, he just wanted the car moved. He didn't want a lecture. He didn't want a complicated conversation. He wanted the truck to show up and the day to stop getting worse. The tow truck arrived faster than he expected. The driver stepped out like nothing was wrong. No stress, no urgency, no explanation, just business. He checked the car, hooked it up, told him it would be fine, said they'd take care of it. There was something comforting about that, something that made him relax just enough to stop asking questions. The car got loaded. The truck rolled out. He followed, still thinking this was a simple tow and a simple bill. That assumption didn't last long. When they reached the destination, the driver started talking about the final amount. And the number was no longer the one he had been given on the phone. It was higher, not by a little, by enough that it immediately felt wrong. He asked why. The driver pointed to one line, then another, hookup fee, mileage fee, storage fee, after-hours charge, dispatch charge, administrative charge. One by one, the little additions piled up until the original quote looked like a fantasy. He stared at the invoice and felt the first real wave of irritation. This was not what he had agreed to. He said that clearly. He said the original price had been lower. He said the dispatcher had told him a different amount. He asked why the bill had changed. The answer was vague, too vague. He was told there must have been a misunderstanding. He was told the final amount was the standard rate. He was told the extra charges were normal. He was told towing can vary depending on the situation. That did not answer his question. It just made him more suspicious. Because if the price can change that much, then the quote was never really a quote. He asked for the paperwork. He asked for an itemized breakdown. He asked for the name of the person who had given the original number. He asked whether the tow company had recorded the call. That last question made the mood shift. The driver stopped being friendly. The dispatcher stopped sounding casual. The whole tone moved from service to resistance in a matter of seconds. Now he was no longer just a stranded customer. He was a problem. That was the moment he realized this was going to be a fight. He refused to pay the inflated total until he understood where it came from. That only made things worse. The driver acted offended. The office sounded defensive. The company started talking to him as if he were unreasonable for asking why the bill had changed after the car was already on the truck. So he did the first thing that actually helped. He started documenting everything. He took photos of the tow truck. He took photos of the invoice. He took photos of the car on the truck. He saved the call log. He wrote down the time of the original quote. He wrote down the time the final bill was presented. He saved every message. Then he went home and looked at the paperwork more carefully. That's when the pattern started to show. The quote on the phone had been vague, not completely false, just vague enough. The final bill had been precise, too precise, as if the company had spent all its effort making sure the final number was hard to challenge. He noticed the quoted price had never clearly mentioned several of the charges now sitting on the invoice. No real warning about the storage fee, no proper disclosure of the extra add-ons, no obvious explanation of how the mileage was calculated. He called the company back. This time, he was not trying to be polite. He was trying to pin them down. He asked for the recorded quote. He asked for the employee name. He asked whether the dispatcher had the authority to give a fixed rate. He asked why the invoice did not match the number he had been told. The answer kept shifting. First, it was a misunderstanding. Then it was standard pricing. Then it was a special situation. Then it was what towing usually costs. But usually is not the same as agreed. He knew that now, so he asked for the itemized invoice in writing. He asked them to confirm the charges by email. He asked for the terms and conditions that supposedly allowed the extra fees. They were less helpful after that. The company acted like he was creating a problem where none existed. But the problem was on the paper. The numbers were there. The changes were there. The gap between the quote and the bill was there. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't going to pay for a mystery just because they were confident about the tone they used. So he did what he should have done in the first place. He filed a complaint. He wrote down the sequence: dead car, tow request, phone quote, arrival, truck hookup, final invoice, unexpected fees. He attached the photos. He attached the notes. He attached the message exchange. He attached the copy of the invoice. Then he sent it and waited. That waiting was ugly because the car was already gone. The bill was already there. The company still wanted money, and every day that passed felt like pressure to just pay and stop thinking about it. That is exactly what companies like this count on. The fact that most people would rather absorb a bad charge than keep fighting a company that talks like it has done nothing wrong. But he stayed on it. And while the complaint sat there, he started asking around. He checked with another towing company. He asked what a normal local tow should cost. He asked how these charges are usually structured. He asked whether a hookup fee and mileage fee was supposed to be disclosed before the tow started. The answer from the second company was not good for the first one. Some charges might be legitimate, some can vary. But if the price quote does not clearly match the final bill, then the customer should have been warned. And if the company added unexpected charges after the vehicle was already secured, that looked questionable. That second opinion gave him something valuable: outside confirmation. Now the problem was not just his opinion versus theirs. It was his invoice versus common practice. He sent that too. Then the tone from the tow company changed again. They said they would review the bill. They said one of the fees may have been entered incorrectly. They said the storage charge may not have applied. They said the mileage number could have been off. In other words, the bill was suddenly less fixed than they had claimed. That was the crack, not an apology, not a confession, a crack. A few days later, a corrected invoice came through. The number was lower, still not ideal, still not the number he had been quoted at first, but far closer to it than the original shock. Now the invoice looked like something he could actually recognize. Not generous, not perfect, but at least not padded with surprise charges. He paid the corrected amount and saved everything. The first quote, the invoice, the complaint, the second opinion, the corrected bill, because the lesson was bigger than the money. A tow company can sound calm and still change the price later. A quote over the phone is not enough if it is not written down. A customer stranded on the road is easy to pressure. And once the car is already hooked up, the company knows you're not in the strongest position to argue. That's what made the whole thing feel dirty, not the tow itself. The way the bill was handled after the tow was already unavoidable. He had called for help. He had gotten a truck. And then the company had tried to turn that emergency into a bigger bill. But the paperwork didn't hold up. The pressure didn't hold up. And once he kept pushing, the whole thing started to fall apart. The car had broken down on the road. The tow company had tried to break the price afterward. He pushed back. And the final number came back down. Then he sat down later that night and thought about how close he had come to just paying it. That was the part that stuck with him. Not because the amount would have destroyed him, because he knew how easy it would have been to let the issue go. One bad tow bill can feel like a small problem when you are already tired. You tell yourself it is not worth the energy. You tell yourself maybe the company knows more about towing than you do. You tell yourself a few extra charges are just the cost of being stuck on the side of the road. That is how they win, not with one huge lie, with a series of small pressures. He looked back at the first phone call and realized the quote had been given in the most casual possible way. No written confirmation, no detailed breakdown, no explanation of what could increase the final amount. Just a number that sounded reasonable enough to stop him from shopping around. And that was probably the point. Because when a person is stranded, they do not want to negotiate. They want movement. They want the problem to stop. They want the car off the road. They want the whole mess to become someone else's responsibility. That makes them vulnerable. The tow company knew that. Maybe not in a malicious cartoon villain way, but enough to take advantage of it. He started thinking through the whole event again, this time like a checklist. The car died. He called for help. He got a quote. The truck arrived. The car was hooked up. The price changed after the fact. He asked for proof. They gave him excuses. He documented everything. He pushed for a review. The bill dropped. That was the whole story, stripped of emotion. But the emotion mattered too, because every step in that sequence had happened while he was stressed, stranded, and dependent on people who controlled the next move. That kind of imbalance is why these bills get away with so much. A tow truck is not just a service. It is leverage. Once your car is on the truck, the company can create urgency. Once the urgency exists, people stop asking whether the quote was honest. He was not interested in letting that happen again. So he saved every document in a folder on his phone. He labeled the screenshots. He kept the email chain. He saved the corrected invoice. He even wrote down the names of the people he spoke to in case he ever needed them again. Because the real lesson was not just fight the bill. It was build the record before they decide the story for you. A lot of people do not do that. They rely on memory. They rely on verbal promises. They rely on the hope that the other side will act fairly once the issue is pointed out. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. But when the bill is padded and the company is confident, memory is weak. Paper is strong. He also thought about how the quote had been framed, not as a quote, really, more like an estimate disguised as certainty. That is a dangerous trick. If you give someone a loose number over the phone and they hear it as a fixed price, you have created a future fight. If you then add surprise charges after the car is already loaded, you have turned that fight into a trap. He would not call every towing company dishonest. That would be too easy and too sloppy. Some tow jobs really do cost more because of distance, timing, or difficulty. But in his case, the line between real charge and invented charge had been way too blurry. And the blur was the problem. Because a customer can accept a fair fee. What they cannot accept is a fee that changes shape after they are already committed. He pictured the exact moment the truck arrived. He had felt relief. That relief had made him less careful, less likely to challenge the quote, less likely to ask for a written estimate before the hookup started. That was the trap, not the tow, the timing. If he had known then what he knew later, he would have asked for the full quote by text before agreeing. He would have asked what charges could apply after pickup. He would have asked whether there was a storage charge if he delayed payment. He would have asked whether the dispatch fee was included. He would have asked whether mileage started from the initial call or from the truck's arrival. He would have made the company slow down. And that, more than anything, is what these companies hate. A slowed-down customer. Because a slowed-down customer reads the terms. A slowed-down customer asks for proof. A slowed-down customer notices the gap between the quote and the invoice. He was that customer now. By the time the corrected bill was settled, he had also noticed something else. The company never fully explained how the extra fees appeared. They just quietly removed some of them when pressed. That meant they could remove them all along, which meant the original bill had not been as fixed as they implied. That realization made him more annoyed than the money did. Because if a company can adjust a charge after you complain, then the first version was never really final. It was just the version they hoped you would accept without challenge. He knew he had been close to accepting it. That was the part that bothered him most. Not that he had been overcharged, that he almost paid the overcharge because he was tired. The story changed for him when he realized that tiredness is expensive. It is expensive in towing. It is expensive in repair shops. It is expensive anywhere someone presents a customer with a number they cannot easily verify in the moment. So he made a personal rule. If he ever gets quoted a price by phone again, he gets it in writing. If the price can change, he asks, what can change it? If the company says standard fee, he asks for the standard in advance. If the bill looks wrong, he does not rely on memory. He relies on records. That rule came from one bad day and one bad invoice. And it saved him from letting the company write the ending for him. The car was already repaired by then. The tow had already happened. The money had already moved. But the part that mattered most was that the first bill did not survive contact with proof. He kept thinking about the company's tone during the whole process. Calm at the beginning, defensive in the middle, suddenly flexible at the end. That sequence told him everything he needed to know. If they had truly believed the first bill was right, they would have stood by it. Instead, the pressure made them blink. And once they blinked, the bill changed. That is the whole reason he kept going, not because he wanted a fight, because he wanted the number to mean something. The tow had been simple, the bill had been the problem. He had called for a rescue, and the company had tried to turn the rescue into a markup. He stopped them. By the end of it, he had a story he would never forget. Not because the tow itself was dramatic, not because the car breaking down was unusual, because the bill taught him how fast a simple problem can turn into a price trap when you are stranded, tired, and not expecting the numbers to move. That was the part he kept coming back to. The car had failed once. The tow company had tried to make the failure more expensive, and the only reason the final bill changed was because he refused to treat the first number like a fact. He thought about how different the outcome would have been if he had just paid. No complaint, no second opinion, no proof, no pressure, just a bigger charge, quietly accepted. That almost happened, and that was the whole point. He learned that tow quotes should be pinned down before the truck arrives. He learned that verbal prices are too easy to bend later. He learned that extra fees become harder to challenge once the car is already hooked up. He learned that a customer in a hurry is exactly the customer a bad invoice is built for. What saved him was not luck. It was slowing the whole thing down. Ask for the quote in writing. Ask what the fee includes. Ask about mileage, hookup, storage, and after-hours charges before you agree. Take photos. Save messages. Keep the call log. And if the bill changes after the fact, challenge it immediately. Because once the company understands you are keeping records, the tone changes. The tow truck had taken his car. The company tried to take more. He pushed back, and the final number came down.